So it is my pleasure to welcome you all to Café Sci. This is our third Café Sci for the year. And we're going to hear from Ben Twining and Sydney and Manasi. So, but before we get into that, I wanted to give a great big thank you for HM Payson, who sponsors us every year. They are one of the donors that support us year in, year out to help us get our science out into the world. I want to thank, we've got a number of board members and advisory board members and donors in the audience, and thank you all for what you do for this laboratory. We could not do it without you. I also like to thank the taxpayers of America, because a lot of our funding comes from federal grants. And so we are working on a number of really pressing problems in the ocean, both advancing basic research, but also trying to solve societal problems, especially those around climate change. Before we get into the talk, for people online, if you have questions during the presentation, you can write it in on the question and answer button at the bottom, and we'll be monitoring that. We'll have a break for questions, and so we'll be walking around with a microphone, so keep your questions and we will try to get all those answered. And then I want to turn it over to Ben Twining. So Dr. Ben Twining is a very well-respected oceanographer. He is a real leader in the field of trace metal chemistry, and last year gave a talk on his research. So he's doing double duty here. He just spent, what, 2.5 months in the Southern Ocean, leading a research group looking at trace metal concentrations down around Antarctica, so in the Southern Ocean. So he does the big real world science, and he is also our Vice President of Education. So we're really proud of our education programs here. They are immersive programs where we really try to give students and the general public in many cases a sense of what it's like to be a scientist, and the challenges and the fun and the excitement of discovery. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and again, thank you all for being here.
Great, thank you, Debbie, and thanks everyone for coming tonight. My name is Ben Twining, as Debbie said, and I am the Vice President for Education, in addition to being a Senior Research Scientist. And I'm excited tonight to talk about our education programs, and in particular, the sort of unique approach we take to them. Being a research institution, most of the teaching we do doesn't happen in a classroom, though we do some of that, but most of it happens through the research experiences that our students gain while they're here. And so I'm going to talk about that, and then the best part is you don't just get to hear from me, you get to hear from 2 students who are currently here about their own experiences, and they will either confirm what I've said or give me a totally different example, and you'll think that I'm not kidding. All right. No pressure. Let's try that button. Okay, so I want to start with sort of 3 messages that we hope that all students take away with them after their time at Bigelow, and they're really central, I think, to the sort of purpose of our lab in general. And one of them is to come away with an understanding and an appreciation for the importance of the oceans to the health of the Earth. I love this picture taken, I think, from the International Space Station of the Earth, particularly of the Pacific Ocean side of it. And you can see it's nearly, almost all you can see is the ocean. And the oceans cover 2/3 of the Earth and really play a key role in moderating our climate, in providing food for people, and basically supporting the habitability of this planet. And I love this quote, how inappropriate to call this planet Earth, when clearly it is ocean. And we hope that students, many of whom come here really maybe understanding the large organisms that live in the ocean, like whales or fish, before they get here, leave understanding the importance of the ocean itself as well. Another message that we hope everybody gets when they're here is that most of the life in the ocean is in fact microscopic. And this has been known really since some of the early times using microscopes to look at seawater, when some of these beautiful drawings on the left were done by Ernst Haeckel, looking at these initial microorganisms in the ocean. And then on the right, we have some beautiful micrographs taken by Bigelow scientists of the organisms in the ocean. But it is true that most of the things that live out there are tiny. And despite their small size, they generate the oxygen we breathe, they take up our carbon dioxide, and they're food for organisms in the ocean. And we hope that all students sort of take that lesson away with them. And a third lesson that I think is really important for students to learn is that science may not conform to all of their preconceived notions. I think often, particularly high school students, will come here and their exposure to science has primarily been maybe in a classroom in high school. And they may think of science that's done largely by some old white guy who potentially even wears a suit to the laboratory. I haven't seen anyone in a suit here in a while. But that is not how modern science is done. Science is a team sport. It's very hard to study the environment without many different perspectives. Science is also something that is rarely solitary, and it is performed by many folks of all, sort of stripes and colors and sizes. It's a really, we hope, a very inclusive activity. And so that's another thing that we hope to take away from their time here. Okay, so with that sort of introduction to the overarching themes of our programs, here's what I'm planning to talk to you about tonight. In my remaining 15 or so minutes, I'm going to give you just an overview of the diverse education programs we run here. I'm going to talk to you about sort of this inquiry-based approach that we take, where we have students learn by actually doing science and the value of that. I'm going to talk about the value of our small size. Bigelow is not a big organization, and I think that really enhances our ability to teach through research and mentorship. And I want to talk a bit about the long-term value, get my cursor out of the way, the long-term value that Bigelow programs have for students with all sorts of interests. You don't need to be on the track to becoming a PhD in ocean science to take away valuable skills from our experiences here. And then I'm going to stop talking. You'll have time to ask me questions. And then we're going to hear from two students who are currently working at Bigelow, Greenlee and Monika Desai, about their experiences, which will be fantastic. Okay, so a brief history of Bigelow education programs. This is one of only two graphs I'm showing tonight, so don't get excited, lots of pictures. And I wanted to talk about the growth of our programs starting in around 1990 when our first program started. And I want to show them basically against the target audience or the student population that we're targeting with those programs. So our oldest formal education program is the Bloom program. It stands for Bigelow Laboratory Orders of Magnitude. And it's a high school program that targets students. We try to get 16 students, one from each county in the state of Maine. Sometimes that's a challenge, getting them from the more rural, lesser populated states. But we bring them here for a week in May to do science, to get out onto the water and to analyze samples and to try to understand what they're learning. And that program was started by Maureen Keller in 1990 and has been running for, I think, 34 years now, which is fantastic. In the mid-90s, two of our longest serving SRSs, Barney Balch and Patty Matrai, arrived, and with them started both a partnership with the University of New England, teaching some courses on the UNE campus and running internships for UNE students here. So this is our first engagement with college students. And we also started a program of summer professional courses where professionals would come from around the country and farther afield and learn, really specific scientific skills from the experts here. And these are, I think, an initial interaction that many folks have had with Bigelow in our field. Starting in around 2009, 2010, with the arrival of me and others here at the lab, we started our summer research internship program. We call this the REU program, Research Experiences for Undergraduates. That was started in 2009 with 8 students. We now have almost 30 students. They're here right now. They are finishing on Thursday. Many of them are a little bit nervous about that, but have done a great job. And that's really a hallmark program for us now, bringing energy in students in the summer. We also started to really grow our postdoctoral research core of students or researchers. These are folks who've gotten their PhD and are doing sort of a learning experience, both doing research and learning how to be principal investigators. There was one postdoc here when I started in 2008. We now have, I think, 17, and they are a really core group of folks for the lab. In 2012, we were given the McKee House, which is the small house at the bottom of the driveway, and that allowed us to start housing students on campus and growing programs that way. So we started the Sea Change semester program, which I'll show you some pictures of. This is a fall semester program for undergraduates from Colby and other schools. That is also a core part of our programs. In around 2015 or so, we started the Bloom Educator program, where in addition to just teaching high school students, we now bring in middle school and high school teachers and teach them about marine science curriculum, help them develop those curriculum and form a network of teachers around the state to teach marine science. In 2017, we opened Shamield Hall, which is a 32-bed dormitory for residents down the hill, which allowed us to greatly expand the students that we can host here on campus. And that has allowed us to then host other programs that we do partnerships with. So for example, we've had students in classes from Dartmouth College, from Harvard University, Northeastern University, Wake Forest, the Maine School of Science and Math, and other groups where they'll come in with their teachers often and do an experience for several days or a week here and be hosted at the laboratory. And finally, several years ago, we started a partnership with the University of Maine where we host PhD students, and Sydney is one of those, and you'll hear about her experiences through that, as well as co-op students from Northeastern who come supported by the Rue Institute in Portland. So you can see we're really hitting many, many different ages, but almost all of these programs have a similar theme that I'm going to talk you through, sort of how we do this. And last thing I want to point out is that we're about to break ground in October on our new Center for Ocean Education and Innovation, sort of driven by this growth in programs and the demand for education space at the lab. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the Bloom program as an example of our longest running program and sort of give you a flavor of how this inquiry-based science education works. So students come in, they meet with some scientists and start to think about the coastal environment around us, the kinds of questions that might be interesting to ask, sort of letting the students generate those, thinking how they might answer some of those questions, and then we immediately get them out into the field. We go out into the boat. In this case, here are two students who are working with David Fields. That's a slightly earlier picture of David Fields. You'll get to compare to his current condition in the next slide. But David is a pillar of our education programs, and here he is talking to students about what we're going to do, how does it work to collect these samples. And on the right, you can see students collecting samples. They're collecting water with a Niskin sampler, which is a bottle that collects water from a certain depth, bringing it back up onto the boat. And the students then have to sample that. They have to fill up, various containers. They have to take different types of filtered samples, and they have to deal with all the things that come with working at sea. What do you do if the bottle is leaking? What do you do if you hit it against the side of the boat and a part breaks? What do you do if one of the caps doesn't tightly seal on your bottle? There's actually a number of things that can happen when you're out in the environment doing this work. And the process of learning about that and how to respond to that develops a great amount of confidence and I think just appreciation for the science through the students. They then come back into the lab and spend 2 days analyzing those same samples that they collected. So here's a more recent picture of David helping the students prepare samples for zooplankton microscopy. And you can see a student over on the right looking at some of these samples. And students spend a lot of time sort of really looking at them, watching these organisms move, understanding how to identify them, what different types of things are living in the ocean, how much of them are they, how much do they contribute to, for example, carbon cycling in the ocean. And then we use more, or they use more sophisticated techniques. So the students in the middle are preparing samples for flow cytometry, which is a laser-based instrument that was developed. Its use here at Bigelow, and it's used to count and size plankton in the ocean, including bacteria and viruses. So they get to sort of do the scientific process and also get introduced to some really fancy and cool equipment as well. So then after this sort of whirlwind of 2 days of sample analysis, they then meet as a team and try to figure out what happened, and there's not a pre-formed idea, or there's not we don't know in advance what's going to happen. And I think that's a rather really valuable lesson for the students, is just sort of grappling with that data and what's it telling us. And then they have to present that to a group of the Bigelow community and also their parents when they come to pick them up. And it's amazing how the process of not only learning something, but then having to present it back to a group really forces you to cement those concepts in your mind. And it's been wonderful to watch the students down the upper right. They're sort of explaining how a plankton net works. Of course, they were just introduced to that net maybe a couple of days ago, and now they're explaining it to their parents, how to use it. And the growth and the speed at which they pick these things up and it cements in their heads is really amazing. Okay, so that's sort of the process that we go through. We use that same model in similar ways with other programs at higher education levels. As I mentioned, the Sea Change semester is a fall semester program with undergraduates. They're here for 14 weeks. They've taken some college courses already. These are typically juniors. And so they go out on bi-weekly cruises every 2 weeks over the course of the semester to take a longer list of samples and analyze them themselves. But they go through the same process of really delving into real data, of figuring out how to do it, and sort of the maturity and the organization and the perseverance that comes with that process. And I love this picture in the middle of these three students just sort of like hanging out. They're like old salts now as the boat steams between stations. Okay, another component of our work is Colby accredited classroom teaching. But even here, the teaching, well, not just classroom, but classroom and lab teaching. And most of these courses are built on our research. So here again, we're sort of seeing a close connection between research and teaching. An example of that is this course taught by Dr. Nicole Price and Dr. Doug Rasher, who are shown up here on the left. They're in their wetsuits, having led these students on a dive in Bermuda. And this is a course, it's a January term course where students first spend a couple days at the Colby campus learning how to do research snorkeling, work with devices underwater. And then they go to Bermuda for 2 weeks, and they're collecting samples and learning to experience the reef, but they're also participating in Nicole's research. So her research involves putting out these plates on the right, and they sit on the reef, and invertebrates settle on them over months and years. And so the students can collect them, bring them back to the lab in Bermuda, and then they bring them back to Bigelow for a week. And they analyze them, and they understand what factors are controlling how organisms are settling on the reef in Bermuda. And so, you get a sense of the long-term trajectory of this research through this course. Another example is a course that Pete Countway and Nick Record, two more senior research scientists here, have taught about climate change in the Gulf of Maine. This is also a January term course, and I love the picture of Pete and the students out there in the driving snow on the Bigelow dock. But science happens regardless of the conditions. And here they're collecting samples to understand the community that's present in a January in the Damariscotta River estuary, and then collecting that water. And on the right, we're putting it into these large 5,000-liter tanks in the basement of the lab here, and slightly warming up that water and seeing how the microbial system responds. So here again, a class teaching scientific concepts, but based on research interests of Pete and Nick and many others at the lab. And the person on the right is Sydney Greenlee, who you're going to see with slightly longer hair in a moment. Okay, another core component of Bigelow programs is the role of mentorship. And I think our small size, and quite literally the lack of walls that we have built between laboratories and between the hallway and labs, really contributes to our ability to do this mentorship. This is a picture of Dr. Patty Matrai mentoring some summer students that are working with her. And one of the things that really sticks out to me is that the student on the left, this is Erica Alvarado, who worked with me from the University of Idaho, is also gaining from that mentorship, right? Because Patty is helping not only her own student, but she got to know all of the students and is working with all of them. And that's really, I think, a common theme here is that it's a small community. We sort of eat meals with the students. We get to talk to the students. We have barbecues with them, and they get to engage with many of us throughout the lab. Another opportunity comes from the field research that many of us do at the lab. And so I've got a picture of our intrepid leader, Dr. Bronk, on the left here, who took Lily Naney to a cruise in the Mid-Atlantic, I believe. Yep, right after you started. And cruises are a time when you're not only doing research together, but you're eating meals together. There's lots of sort of downtime to talk about life trajectories, work trajectories, sort of just provide guidance and mentorship. And so everybody does it from top to bottom at the lab. The middle picture is a picture of me with Angel Wacho, who is a summer intern with me from the University of UC Irvine. He has now done his PhD and is now a postdoc at the University of Washington. And I got to see him at a meeting last week in New Hampshire, which was fantastic to continue to have this professional relationship with this wonderful individual who I met 12 years ago. And then the picture on the right is me and 5 folks all on the ship at the end of a cruise this past January. This is in the Strait of Magellan off Chile. And we're able to have a number of students, past students, come and join on the cruise. So Dan Onimus was a postdoc with me. He's now a professor at the University of Georgia. Jewel Middleton was a sea change student who is now a postdoc at UC Santa Barbara. Dylan Harbison was a virtual REU student with me in the summer of 2020. He never even got to leave his bedroom in Texas, but he got to join us on this cruise for 2 months. Laura Sofin is a postdoc with me currently, and Mariah Ricci was a summer intern here who's now a graduate student with Dan. So many connections, many sort of demonstrating the longevity of these personal relationships and professional relationships through time. Okay, another component that we really stress is communication with students here. right? Science is important, but it's only as useful as we can communicate to others, including our peers. And so there's a lot of emphasis on communicating science both through publications, one of the core ways that scientists work. And here are two examples of publications that in the top have been led by a student, Neil Ross, who worked with Nick Record and led a paper on right whale habitat in the Gulf of Maine. And the bottom paper involving two interns whose names I've highlighted, working with Jose Fernandez Robledo. And this is on a type of clam cancer and the transmission of those cancer cells between clams, which was really interesting and a little bit scary. But so, in this example, these students not only get involved in the research, but they get involved with understanding how you work with a large team. How do you pull together research from 10 or 12 different people into a single paper? It's a really valuable lesson. We work really hard to bring students to in-person conferences as well. On the right is Gabby Kim, who is a Colby student who worked with me both in the fall and in the summer. And this is her at the 2020 Ocean Sciences meeting in San Diego about 2 weeks before COVID put an end to briefly, or not so briefly, for in-person meetings. But these meetings are a chance for students to meet peers, to meet potential graduate mentors, and to meet many others within the field and really help their sort of learning process of whether this is something they want to continue to do professionally. We also spend time and effort talking about communicating to non-science audiences. And one of the activities that we do with our Sea Change students is to spend actually 3 days learning how to communicate important scientific concepts through, in this case, stop motion videos. So we call these sea sketches, and you won't get the sound, but there is a great soundtrack to this. But this is one of the videos that was made. These are available on the Bigelow YouTube channel, communicating the ideas behind eDNA. So the idea that organisms release cells that you can measure after the organism has left that will let you study them. And so the process of distilling down all the concepts and the components of eDNA into a simplified version that gives the core components of it is really valuable for students. And those have been a great exercise we do. We also have worked with art students at Covey. This is an example of students from a sculpture class, and they created these sort of 1 foot cube limestone sculptures based on phytoplankton in the ocean and created the wooden structures as well to indicate their environment. And they worked on those. They worked with Bigelow scientists to develop those and then showed them here for a year, which was amazing. So lots of work about communication with students. So I also want to stress that the students that benefit from their time at Bigelow are not only students who go on to become PhDs like us. There are 3 examples here I just wanted to put up, and I could give many more of students who've gone on to very different and sort of other interesting careers. Grace Reville was one of our original inaugural Sea Change students, who then went on to the Peace Corps. She did a master's actually in international policy at Yale, and then now works as an officer at the Blue Nature Alliance, working on international treaties in the high ocean, on the high seas, and understanding how nations can work together to protect the ocean. Josephine Leon was also in that same Sea Change group. She's now a social entrepreneur and CEO, and she started a company called Colliebox, which makes reusable bento boxes in London. And it's really cool. They have these boxes that you can basically put them back into the kiosk, and you get an app and you get credit for it, and it allows you to really reduce the plastic use during sort of the lunch crowd in London, which I think is really cool. And Afia Obang was a 2015 Sea Change student who then went on to be a science teacher for several years in New York, and now is a medical student in Wisconsin. And so, 3 very different trajectories, all who've benefited from the sort of critical thinking that they got from their time at Bigelow. Okay, so all of this sort of these programs have built up to result in a significant growth in the number of students served by Bigelow. And this is the second of 2 graphs showing that growth from less than 50 students to more than 350 over the past decade or so. And this has led to the need for more space. And so we're really excited in October to be doing the groundbreaking for the new Center for Education and Innovation. There's a rendering of that over on the right. This is going to be in that beautiful cleared lot that now exists behind you. And as an sort of example of the need for this, I've included a picture on the left. These are fall semester students doing an experiment. And this was done in my lab. So when I was teaching this course for the month, I just cleared out my lab and stopped the research essentially so that we could do these exercises. And that works for a little bit. But as we, with this growth, it's no longer practical or really very efficient to be kicking scientists out of their space for that. And so this new wing, this new center is going to have 2 classrooms. It's going to have 2 dedicated teaching labs and lots of space for students. And that is the end. And so I welcome some questions now before we have a break, and then you'll get to hear from some of the students who are here now. Thank you.
Questions?
Do you guys run any programs for elementary and middle school age children, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so most of as you've seen, most of the programs tend to be, undergraduates are sort of our sweet spot. We have the Bloom program for high school students, but we're starting to grow our engagement with younger students. And one of the ways we're doing that is with partnership with the Booth-Bay Science Center. Some of you may know, and that's an organization, based right here, and they've got new gigs in East Booth-Bay. And so with younger groups, often I think we work with other programs to bring them in and engage them. And I think we are just now investing in new staff members to help with that. And as we have this new space and that new staff, I'm really hoping to grow that engagement with those younger students. Thanks. Is there a question in the back? Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Twining, there's been a lot of growth in the just the raw size of the population you're serving there. Do you have a goal, or does the lab have a goal for the next 5 years about where you want to go to? Because the trend was steep.
Yeah, I would say, I think our goal is to be right-sized, and that sounds like maybe sort of a generic answer, but this is a research organization, and research is the core activity, and a lot of this growth, remarkably, has been fairly organic as the science has grown. Bigelow's scientific staff has almost probably increased by 50 or 75%, something like that. And as those people have come in and their research programs have grown, they've wanted to engage more students. So I think we will follow that path. I think we also are investing in some dedicated science education staff that will help that. But I don't think we are ever going to, I would be surprised if that number more than doubled ever, because I think in part we want to stay with small, hands-on immersive programs, and because we want those programs to be scaled to the size of our science. I think those are important components to stay with. Thanks.
In the future, when you open up the new education center, what sort of relationship do you foresee with local high schools?
Yeah, great question about relationship with local high schools. So we've had lots of conversations with the local school system about possible engagement. I will say, in the absence of that wing or dedicated education staff, we're not very well set up in this building to bring in classrooms of 4th graders, for example. And so some of the engagement has been with Bigelow scientists going into the classroom and working with classes. But when we have those dedicated teaching labs, I think we'll be much better set up to welcome groups of students without, sort of displacing the science. So those are conversations that are ongoing. We're probably sort of a year and a half away from that. But I hope that we will be able to better engage the local, and I think we have a real obligation to engage the school system locally, and I hope further afield as well. And it's never too early to start imparting the excitement and the importance of the ocean. So I definitely hope we'll be able to grow that, and expect us to.
Hi, I'm a secondary teacher in local area. I would really like to know, what science skills do you want to see in your high school students, the Bloom Project, and the undergrads coming in? What experiences can I make sure to give them so that they're prepared for you?
Great question. What experiences do we want to see? I think if I had to give one answer, I would say a comfort with data, or just an idea that numbers are not something to be scared of. There's sort of this idea, students get in their mind very early whether they're good or bad at math. And I think math isn't quite so much as important as just comfort with numbers, that observations in the environment we quantify them with numbers, and that we can now do this in many ways, and there's sort of data all around us. And I think at all levels, we now engage students in sort of grappling with data. And I hope that students will have experience with that before they get here, that they're not just thinking about concepts, but they're actually sort of looking at data, whatever that is, whether that's, the temperature of the room, or, the color of, the food dye in their experiment. But yeah, data is now a common denominator of everything we do.
Hi. I was the children's librarian in the town for many years. And we used to have a very close relationship with you guys. You used to come to the lawn and we used to go and visit you in the touch tank and all. And I was wondering, how long have you been in this building? Because this is way better than.
So we moved in here in 2011, 2012 probably was the real, but there's no touch tank here. That's one of the problems with moving from McCown Point. If we don't have a touch tank anymore, if we don't have DMR next to us.
I'm just so overwhelmed with everything here, being introduced to this area, to this building and all. And I was just so excited about you guys, even when you were in the little place and we used to visit you when you came to us. And I thank you very much because the children loved it and it always left a warm place in my heart. And congratulations on this wonderful area.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And we had lots of kids, local kids, come for our open house last Friday, which was fantastic to see as well. It was really fun to engage with them through that. So
We also have a scientist, Doug Rasher, who said that he thought we should have a touch tank. And that if it could be in a lab down on the water where he could run his programs and diving programs out of it, it would be an extraordinary service for the community. That was a joke. People didn't get it was a joke. He started with the touch tank and ended up with a building of his own on the water. So I clearly didn't tell that very well. Never mind.
great. So move on to second. Yeah, one more here.
Funded here.
Yeah, so how are the graduate students funded here was the question. Good question. So I would say all of the PhD students here are funded by the National Science Foundation through a joint grant to the University of Maine and Bigelow. And so you'll hear from Sydney, who's an example of that. We do have other graduate students, particularly international graduate students who come through the lab for maybe 6 months at a time, who may have other funding. For a while, we had a number of master's students from France because France had a program to support international experiences for their students. So there are other funding routes, but primarily most of the graduate students, in fact, I'd say in the country, are often largely supported by grants from the National Science Foundation and other federal agencies.
We're running out of that money before they're done.
Yes, and it turns out that they don't support them as long as it takes to get a PhD, which is nothing against the PhD students. But yeah, it is a challenge, right? Because we're not a tuition charging organization. And so there's always this question of how do you support students fully through their experience? Yep. Okay, well with that, I think we might move on to one of those students. So let me introduce Sydney Greenlee, who is a student who's done many things here, and take it away.
Thank you, Ben. My name's Sydney Greenlee. I'm a PhD student a PhD candidate at the University of Maine. What that means is I passed a very, very long, hard test. I'm originally from Northern Virginia, but I moved to Maine in 2016. I went to Colby College for my undergraduate degree. And through Bigelow and Colby's partnership programs, I started working here in 2018. My first time at Bigelow was that January course with Dr. Pete Countway that Ben had mentioned. And the following summer, I did my REU with Pete. And I went on to do the Bigelow semester. I was invited on an international research expedition, and now I'm earning my PhD at the University of Maine through the Maine eDNA grant, which is a EBSCOR grant that is a multi-institution partnership that includes the University of Maine and Bigelow. So for my research, I study when, where, why, and why harmful algae blooms form in the Gulf of Maine using DNA-based technology. I'm going to talk to you tonight about how my experiences at Bigelow shaped my passion, skills, and interests in the field of marine science. I've always loved the ocean, as you can see by this baby picture of me trying to jump in the water at the aquarium, and my mom holding me back from that. But I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do within the field of marine science until coming to Bigelow. So now I work on environmental DNA, which is all the DNA in seawater, everything from viruses to whales and organisms in between, and using the DNA from these organisms to differentiate them and count them really quickly from seawater. But I wasn't always interested in that. As Ved had mentioned, a lot of students come to Bigelow interested in things like whales and stingrays, but being exposed from everything from satellite oceanography to single cell genomics, lobster larval diets, and aquaculture in the Gulf of Maine, I've I've been able to shape my direction a lot more. So I'm going to tell you about a few of the projects I have worked on and at the lab. So in and as Ben mentioned, you're gonna watch my hair grow through this presentation because that is me looking at the microscope there. In 2018, I did an REU, and it was my first introduction to the wonderful world of microbes. Oh, sorry, I thought REU is the research experience for undergraduates, the NSF-funded internship program at the lab. I was working with Dr. Pete Countway, exploring sulfur cycling bacteria that live inside the mucus networks created by these sulfur-producing algae colonies, Phaeocystis, the samples collected from Antarctica. And I really, through this, I discovered how amazing the microbial world was and how everything is connected on a microscopic level in the ocean, and how to use molecular tools. And then that fall, I was enrolled in the undergraduate semester program. This is a picture of my cohort on the footbridge in Booth Bay Harbor. The students in this semester take 3 oceanography courses and do a independent research project and field courses, which prepared me very, very well for grad school. They're not easy classes, and they really they train students on how to become scientists. I worked with Dr. Doug Rasher and Dr. Pete Countway, combining what I had learned with molecular tools and my love for scuba diving and kelps and stuff to develop a PCR assay for detecting an invasive species, the lacy bryozoan, which is this crusty organism that grows on kelps and is associated with kelp forest defoliation in the Gulf of Maine. And what's also really cool is that this assay is being used by several students on the main eDNA project for their own dissertation research. The field course taught us students some really valuable skills, like how to work at sea. This is me and a couple of the other students working on a Niskin bottle. And the skills that we learn on this research cruise really scale up. In 2018, I was invited by Dr. Barney Balch to go on a 6-week research expedition in the Southern Ocean. Left from Cape Town, South Africa, went to the middle of the Southern Ocean and back up to Mauritius, studying the interaction between the biology, chemistry, and physics of this very dynamic and relatively underexplored region of the ocean, including Bigelow's favorite chalk-covered phytoplankton friend, the coccolithophore, pictured here. Working at sea was probably the most amazing experience of my whole life and the most defining moment of my career. I learned I was able to use things I learned in the semester program, like standing on the boat, filtering water and trying not to get seasick, using really big Niskin bottles, and using the flow cam, which is another really cool sampling device created here at Bigelow that is able to count and image algae using a laser. And after that, I was my experiences at Bigelow. Bigelow recruited me into doing my PhD at the University of Maine through the Maine eDNA project. My advisor is none other than Dr. Pete Countway. Again, the longevity of these relationships at Bigelow, and we are designing molecular tools for using DNA of harmful algae to figure out when, where, and why they might be blooming in different parts of the Gulf of Maine. I'm really excited to be able to do research that benefits Maine's coastal communities and has impacts on the shellfish industry. And that's me at an oyster farm. One of our collaborators let us come out to his oyster farm, which was very, very fun. And you might notice I'm wearing a mask in this Niskin bottle sampling photo because but science finds a way. It's sampling in strange times. And the most important part of my Bigelow experience is the exposure to a community that is not only focused on doing cutting edge science, but also on education, mentorship, and outreach. I was able to develop and explore my interest in teaching and mentorship, both as an undergrad and a graduate student. It's funny to think about, I've been involved in almost every single educational program that Bigelow has offered, either as a student or instructor. In 2021, the picture on the right with all the masks, I was an instructor for Bigelow's high school program, the Bloom program. In the top photograph, I'm peer mentoring graduate students on the Maine eDNA project on how to perform PCR. And on the left, there's a few of our lab's interns learning to collect samples from the dock. And I'm so fortunate to have been able to work at the lab for so long. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Monsi, who's going to talk about her experiences, and I'd be happy to take questions after Monsi shares her experiences.
Hi, my name is Monika Desai. I'm currently a lab technician here at Bigelow, and today I'm going to talk to you about my Bigelow experiences. So I've been in 2 of Bigelow's educational programs, and it was really thanks to these programs that I've made lifelong friends, learned really valuable research and technical skills, and it also made me realize my passion for oceanography. So I grew up in India, and I saw like the first-hand effects of plastic pollution in India's rivers and lakes. And it kind of became a lifelong goal of mine to create a solution for this and reduce plastic waste in India. And so I saw a poster for the Sea Change semester program in my college bulletin board, and I went to college in Ohio. And it was like a sign from God saying that this is your first step in achieving your goal. And after that day, I never saw that poster again. So I really thought that was meant for me. But this was during COVID times, and I was scared that it was going to get canceled. But I give huge thanks to the Bigelow staff in running the program really, really smoothly. So we were 10 kids all stuck in the Bigelow residence hall, forced to interact with each other. But I've made some lifelong friends. I think that on the Zoom call as well, we still keep in touch. But yeah, in the pictures here, you can see us having fun, just getting together for dinner, having brunches. We went apple picking at one point. So it was a lot of fun. But the program as well had 2 really interesting aspects to it. So one was obviously doing research on cruises, going out on a boat and doing some sampling, as well as the independent research with a mentor. So this was kind of like my first experience with research. I had no research experience before, so I learned a lot of skills, learned how to handle animals, learned how to use different instruments in the lab, maintain the lab, which was all really fun. My independent research, I was with Dr. David Fields, who is a senior research scientist here, and Maura Niemesto, a research associate here at the lab. And I'll be talking about my research a couple of slides later. But I loved my research so much that I was like, can I please come to your summer program next year? And David was like, sure, go for it. So I applied. for the research experience for undergraduate program in 2021. It is a 10-week intensive program where we just do projects and write abstracts and then give a poster and a presentation at the end of the program. And this was my best summer. I made a ton of friends. I went kayaking, which again was a first for me. So a lot of firsts that I had experienced in Bigelow. So about my research, so I looked at two main ecological concerns in the marine environment: oil spills and microplastics. And I chose to study the effects of these two the connection of these two concerns on a biological specimen, a copepod, which you can see right here, an example of a copepod species. So these guys are tiny marine organisms. They're the size of a rice grain, and they are abundant in the marine ecosystem, can eat anything and everything, which includes microplastics, unfortunately, which already has a harmful effect to their health. But kind of my question was going forward with this was, okay, oil spills leach out a lot of these harmful chemicals. What if these harmful chemicals attached to these microplastics get absorbed to them? And then what if they get ingested by these copepods? What happens then? Do like these toxins get accumulated in their bodies? Do they transfer up the food web? Because these copepods get ingested by commercially important fish and whales. So does that accumulate up to these larger marine organisms, or can they be exported down to the deep ocean via their fecal pellets? So that was basically my big research question: if they provide an ecologically important route for harmful chemicals to enter the marine food web. And so I turned this project into my senior capstone project, which I received honors for. Hopefully a paper will be published soon this year. I have my draft on David's desk. He just needs to give me 100 comments that I'll have to look at. But yeah, so here's David Fields and Monika Desai, the best mentors a student can ask for. One thing I kind of wanted to emphasize on was the poster and presentations that we had to give at the end of the Sea Change semester program, as well as the REU program. I loved this experience. This honestly gave me the confidence to speak on stage and to speak to you guys about my Bigelow experience. I learned how to effectively communicate my science to people. I also learned a very valuable phrase, which is, I don't know the answer to your question. Can I get back to you on that? I've used that countless times. It has saved me. But honestly, this prepared me for college. This prepared me for my senior year. I could go back, talk to my faculty advisor on my research because he was from a different field. And I could go and talk to my peers about my research, and honestly gave me a lot of confidence for interviews as well after college. I also had a chance to go virtually to a conference, the ASLO conference, which stands for the Association for Sciences of Limnology and Oceanography, in 2021, which was really exciting. So currently I'm working as a lab tech. I am a Dartmouth employee, so I'm working with Dr. Mukul Sharma, as seen in the picture here. He is a geochemist professor at Dartmouth. And so him and David Fields are collaborating on this project together. So I'm here at Bigelow to do part of the research and then go back to Dartmouth and do part of the research. And so my project, just a quick overview of it, is we're looking at carbon sequestration in the ocean, which is the ability of the ocean to retain CO2. And we're working on a technique to improve the efficiency, to have the ocean absorb more CO2 and hopefully bring down atmospheric levels of CO2. And yeah, that is the end of the presentation. Sydney and I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
questions?
Since we have some teachers in the audience, they might be interested. What do either of you recommend a student who might be interested in marine science as a career? What things that they can do to prepare themselves and set themselves up as well as you have?
That is a great question. I honestly just being interested in the environment, like looking through news articles, being updated on what's going around in the world, especially any kind of ocean news that's happening, I feel would be just like a good step, a good first step in getting into oceanography, as well as talking to people if they have connections. But yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I would say my biggest advice would be to be passionate, to be excited, to be willing to learn, be willing to be wrong, answer questions even if you think you might be wrong, and to say yes to everything, because if it's just as important to find out what you love doing as it is to find out what you hate doing. But you'll never know until you try.
So I think one of you had brought up that you are mentoring other students now. What is some of the rose and what are some of the thorns of being a mentor?
Oh, that's a really great question. In the Countway Lab, we have a lot of interns either directly in our laboratory or collaborating from other labs who are interested in using molecular techniques. So the rose for me is seeing students or like watching students figure things out and become really excited about their own projects and just helping them generate data and building connections with them. That's always a lot of fun. The thorn will probably be a little bit alleviated by the new education wing. The thorn is space and time to do our own science, which is just a part of mentorship, which is totally fine. If I was to pick a thorn, that would be it. But I love it. It's my favorite thing in the world.
It sounds like you've had a great experience here, both of you. What could Bigelow do to make that experience even better?
I think Bigelow also they host a lot of events. They take the students out for kayaking. We have summer barbecues that give us a chance to get to know everyone better. I remember in my semester program, even though it was COVID times, we still had a great relationship with the senior research scientists who were teaching us the courses at that time. We would invite them back to the residence hall for dinner, or we go to their place for dinners. But it's really these events that bring the entire lab together so that we can talk, share about like our research and just, talk casually. I think has made that really memorable for me. And that's why I was ecstatic that I could come back here and do my research, because I was familiar with the surroundings. I was, I knew a lot of people here that could help me out if I needed them. So that kind of that comforted me, which I felt like added to the experience.
As corny as it sounds, I don't think I would really change anything, but I'd really like a standing desk.
I said anyone could reach out to me that needed a
Sorry, Debbie.
I want to thank you both for enriching us and also enriching the Bigelow community here. It's really amazing to hear your stories. I consider Bigelow's education program this wonderful jewel that sits up here on the coast of Maine. Do you have thoughts of how we can do a better job reaching out to students like yourself in undergraduate programs to let them know that this wonderful jewel of an experience is here that they can take advantage of?
I would say more posters in every college in the US. Honest to God, I did not see that poster the next few years that I was in college. But yeah, just I feel like, yeah, just advertising that this program exists and to colleges that don't have a marine sciences program in them, because I feel a lot of people are interested, but their college just doesn't support that, or just has like an environmental studies department. But yeah, just more advertisement to colleges and high schools around the US would be a great way to start that.
I agree with more advertising. I guess I had it a little easier since I was at Colby, and it's very well, and the semester program is very well integrated into the environmental studies department there. But they've definitely met students there that haven't ever heard of the program and wish they had. So I think just more events like this where students go to colleges even to speak about their experiences would be helpful. Because if I heard someone talking about what we were talking about, I would have definitely jumped all over it.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies. And with that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come out and see us. And I hope to see you back here next Tuesday. Bye.